Hi. It's great to be here in Inverness. It's the first time I've been up this far. And I'm liking it. It's beautiful, and the people are really wonderful, which is great. So as Pete said, I'm going to talk to you this morning as a sort of introduction, really, to the science of happiness, and an introduction to Action for Happiness, the social movement. And I'm hoping that it will start to get you thinking about what does this stuff mean in your own life. And we've heard a lot about getting inspired and some fantastically inspirational talks this morning. I mean, weren't they amazing? But then thinking about how do you apply that for yourselves? So what I see my mission as, really, is helping people unpack happiness. Now, how many of you here, if I said to you, if you had to choose one thing, the ultimate thing that you want for your life, or the ultimate thing that you want for your kids, if you've got kids, how many of you would say, well, I want to be happy, or I want them to be happy? I mean, how many of you would? Pretty much every hand has gone up, most hands, and it's the same every time I ask that question. Yet, how many of us actually spend much time thinking about what that means and what that takes in terms of the actions we take day to day in our lives? So I want you to start thinking about that. Now, this is a scary... Are you up for doing something slightly scary? Can you look around, just somebody near you that you haven't spoken to yet today, you maybe don't know? Do they look as if they're going to bite? Don't think so. I want you just to take 30 seconds each and just share with that new friend what happiness means to you. I mean, when you think about happiness, what does it mean for you? What things come to mind? So go, just share with each other just a few of your thoughts. All right. What were some of the things you heard or you shared? Just shout them out. Let's hear a few of those things. Freedom. Choice. Peace. Contentment. Well-being. Gratitude. Other things. What other things make you happy? Cream cakes, yes. Everything in moderation. Other things. What, holidays? What hobbies did somebody say? Family. Succeeding. Friends. Being present. Lots of different things go into living a happier life, if you like. And some of those are the cream cake sort of things, the enjoying the moment, the pleasurable things. And the ancient Greeks, who wrote a lot about this, they thought a lot about this, people like Aristotle. He talked about hedonia, which is the pleasures, the fleeting pleasures. And they're good, and we'll look at that a bit more in a minute. But they also talked about this other stuff, which maybe sometimes doesn't always feel good in the moment, like family, like succeeding, like achievement, those sorts of things when we're building mastery, as Pete was talking about earlier. Those things might not feel great in the moment, but they ultimately lead to feeling a sort of that our life is fulfilling. And the Greeks called that eudaimonia. So two sorts of happiness, sort of hedonia, pleasure, and eudaimonia, the things that contribute to a fulfilling life. And so there's lots of different ingredients. If we start to unpack happiness, there's a lot of stuff that go into it. And we need to think about both. And often, though, when our instant thought about happiness is all about the pleasure in the moment. But it's these other things go into it too. So there's lots to happiness. But does happiness really matter? I mean, is it just kind of like a nice to have thing, but it's not really something that's that important or feels that serious? I mean, what do you think? It does matter? Why does it matter? Why bother? Yeah. So why is the purpose? There was a great quote on that. I think Aristotle, the end and means of existence or something or other, which I can't remember clearly. Other reasons why does it matter? What do you think? Good for your health, endorphins, physiological work for your children. It has an impact out to others. Yeah. Well, this is really interesting because a lot of us and indeed society indeed is shaped this way in part, that we often say, well, I'll be happy when, I'll be happy if. We think that stuff leads to happiness. There's a little bit of truth in that. But what a lot of the research has been finding out in the last decade or two is that happiness is not just an output of success. It's actually an input to a fulfilling and successful life, with a broad definition of what success means. And I mean sort of happiness as opposed to necessarily material success. So here's some of the research around how happiness affects our physical health. So studies have shown that if we are happier, we are half as likely as to catch a cold. This was a really lovely experiment where they paid people to be shut up in a hotel for a couple of weeks and measured their happiness, injected the cold virus up their nose, and saw who a couple of weeks later developed a cold. So, great study. So, you're half as less likely to catch a cold. We're less at lower risk of heart disease. We're even more likely to live longer, and we're certainly more likely to take care of our health. So happiness seems to matter for our physical health. It's not just a feeling, it has a physiological impact. At work, we know that kids that are happier in their late teens, early 20s, are more likely to earn more. I mean, this is not all about money. It's certainly not all about money. We know that doctors who feel happier make faster and more accurate diagnoses. We know that, and this is a causal study, a lot of psychological evidence is correlational, but causal study has shown, this is economists, University of Warwick, have shown that feeling happier can boost people's productivity by around 12%. This is quite interesting when you think about this, those of you who are managers and leaders of workplaces. This has big implications. And indeed, Alex Edmonds, who's at the London Business School, tracked companies that pay attention to this stuff, so companies that come out top in the Great Places to Work survey, and compared their share price to the stock market average over a 26-year period, and found that if you'd have invested in those 100 great places to work, you'd have had a 3.8% higher year-on-year return than if you'd have invested in the stock market average. So there's something kind of curious here. So it's better for our physical health. It helps at work. But it goes beyond that. We know that people who are happier are more likely to help others. They're more likely to behave responsibly on the road. They're more likely to take care of their finances. They're even more likely to vote and participate. So there are kind of wider social benefits to this stuff. And even more, one of the things that I always point at the screen, and I never point at the wrong thing. Here we go. Here. We all find that happiness has a ripple effect out to other people. Now, we kind of instinctively know this, and Pete talked about that. If you're kind of angry or, grumpy with people, then they start to kind of take a bit of a distance, and Pete mentioned that. But actually science has shown this. This comes from a big study that was done on the east coast of the United States, 10,000 people. It was actually a study of health behaviours and looking at cardiovascular health, amongst other things. But they also tracked people's moods. And they found that there was a ripple effect out of how happy people were for 3 degrees of separation. So that means how I am is impacting not just the people I'm meeting in direct contact with, but the people they're meeting and the people they're meeting, and vice versa. So we all affect each other's happiness. So sometimes when I talk to people, do quite a lot of work around helping people boost their well-being. And I don't know about you, but often the sort of things to take care of ourselves often kind of fall to the bottom of the to-do list and never quite get done. Does anybody have that experience? Yeah. But when you think about, well, actually, I'm not just doing this for me. I'm actually doing it because it has an impact on other people too. Then maybe that gives you a slightly sort of encourages you to actually take that action, to do something yourself because it helps others too. So this is really compelling evidence, and this is why Action for Happiness was formed, actually, because Action for Happiness was founded by a top economist at London School of Economics, Richard Layard. And he looked at studies that showed, whether you look from the 1950s or from the 1970s, depending on which data set you use, we found that actually, on average, we have more than at any point in history now. So GDP per capita, which is our primary measure of social progress in Western economies, or indeed the world, has increased in Europe or in America here. Wherever you look at, it's trended upwards over the last 50 or so years. But if we look at people's life satisfaction, which is a primary measure of how well people feel their lives are going, that has not increased. And we know that mental ill health is rising. We know that depression is one of the number one burdens of disease. So there's clearly a need, because this pure focus on financial success is not delivering us happier lives. So we need to really take action to think about how we close that gap. So, where are we going now? So, we know it's good for us, we know it helps us physically, we know it helps other people, we know there's a need. But can we really change how happy we are? What do you think? Can we do that? A lot or a little? A lot? Or, good. I'm talking to the right audience, clearly. We don't have complete control. I mean, I'll be honest, we don't have complete control over how happy we are, but we have a lot of control. The research is showing that a lot of things affect how happy we feel. Our genetic inheritance and our early upbringing, of course, plays a role. That does have an influence, and a reasonably significant one. Our circumstances, where we live, our environment, things like our income and financial stability, those sorts of things, also play a role. But once we're over a fairly modest baseline, actually, those things play, some studies have suggested, as little as 10% in how happy we feel. Yet often our focus when we're trying to think about how do we live a happier life is on those things, the type of house we live, car we drive, etc. So those can play a modest role in our happiness, but actually very little. But the thing that does have a big influence, and the thing that whoever said feeling in control, feeling choice, feeling a sense of freedom, this is where that comes in. Because the studies are showing that how we think and our behaviors, our daily behaviors, have, on average, and this is an average number, so don't get too hung up on number, say around 40% of our happiness is down to those things. And that's really good news, because those are the things that every one of you can change, start to think about and change right now and from today. So we're going to talk a bit about that. And I think this stuff is really exciting. When my first degree was in psychology, and back then it was thought that when you got to your kind of adulthood, your brain was kind of fixed and it was it. And it was all downhill from then, basically. You couldn't teach an old dog new tricks. But that's completely overturned in the last 20 years, and they've this thing called neuroplasticity, which I'm sure we'll hear at various points during today around that our brains literally can change with intention and practice. It's not overnight. With intention and practice, we can literally create happier, healthy brains. And obviously that helps us live a happier life. So, and with the thing that I found really exciting and why I took a sabbatical to go to University of Pennsylvania and study this stuff in a lot of detail, was that there's been a revolution that's happened in the last 20 years on psychological research, and it's spread out to health, it's spread out to neuroscience and other fields. That psychology historically researched into the minus side of life, why things go wrong and how do we help cure that, get back to zero. And that's really important. But what psychology research didn't really focus on was actually what are the things that really enable people to flourish? What enables people to live a really good life, to feel good in their lives? And so in the last 20 years, psychological research in that area has exploded. And it's giving us clues, not necessarily all the answers, because there's a long way to go, but it's giving us clues as the things that we can do in our own lives that do make most difference. And when we do that, it can help buffer us against mental ill health. And if we do have those conditions, it can help us bounce back quicker or not fall as deep. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts from that. But what I'd like us to do is do an experiment. You up for an experiment? If you've got a pen and paper, grab that. But if you haven't got one, don't worry about it, because you can do it in your head. So I want you to think back to yesterday. Think back to your day yesterday, in your own mind, back to yesterday. And I want you to reflect on 3 things that you were enjoyed, pleased about, or grateful for. And write them down. Maybe you might want to work a word or 2 on why. You don't need to write an essay, just a couple of things to jog your own mind and reflect about it. And they could be big things, but most likely they'll be small. And even if your day yesterday was a day from hell, it was just the worst day ever, it might be that somebody let you in the traffic on the way home, or you got a seat on the bus, or somebody noticed you were having a really terrible day at work and brought you a cup of tea. Whatever it is, doesn't matter what they are, just 3 things and a word or 2 on why. Now look to the opposite direction to where you looked before and see somebody else you haven't yet spoken to today. And I want you to share one of the things on your list and listen to one of theirs. So just go, share one of your good things. I hate to break these up because it's good stuff. So how did that feel to reflect on your good things from yesterday? How did that feel when you were doing it on your own? How did that feel? Positive? You felt good? Yeah? 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 Makes you happier? So listening to other people's good things made you happier. It's really interesting, this. Now, it used to be thought that these things were just incidental. But science has shown that people who did that exact same thing on their own, write down 3 good things, maybe a note or 2 on why, each night for 1 week, so 7 nights, they tracked, measured people's happiness on a range of measures and also propensity to show depression-type symptoms. It wasn't a clinical population. They found, if you look at the green line going up, that happiness increased, and it steadily increased for a period of 6 months after doing that one simple exercise. And depression-type symptoms trended downwards. So that's not bad. I mean, how long did it take you to think about and write down those 3 good things? A minute? Yep. So 7 minutes a week, 10 minutes, maybe let's say 15. Just might want to think about write a bit more about it. 15 minutes a week for a week. That's not a bad investment, is it? Why does that work? Why did it work? You're focusing on the positive? Does it mean you're ignoring the negative? No, because that's it. Absolutely, this is not about positive thinking. But do you normally stop and reflect on those small moments that you've enjoyed, were grateful for, or pleased about? Do you normally do that? No, we don't do it. Well, I'll talk about this in the workshop this evening, because our brains are naturally focused on what's wrong, and there's a whole evolutionary explanation for that. But when we focus on what's right, when we squeeze, more out of these good things that happen, these small moments, it has both a physiological and a psychological effect. So when we are in a kind of pleasant emotional state, just mild. We're not talking about jumping with euphoria, because if we did that all the time, that might not be good either. But when we really take time to squeeze those little positive moments out, it broadens our perceptual fields. We literally see more when we're in a pleasant emotional state. We're more open to other people, we're more trusting of other people, we recognize people from other cultures better, we see more options, we come up with more creative solutions, we're more flexible in our thinking. And little by little by little, that builds our psychosocial resources. So Barbara Fredrickson, who's a sort of groundbreaking psychologist that has developed this theory, calls it the broaden and build theory of positive emotions. Because historically, psychologists have actually thought positive emotions are just a pleasant byproduct. They didn't really serve much long-term purpose. But whilst, I'll talk about that this afternoon, I'll lose time. So it's really interesting, just taking that moment to think about those 3 good things, can really help you. It has a ripple effect out to others. You can even use it at work. Now, when I run workshops in organizations, managers now, then they start their meetings off with just one good thing. And it's not just one thing that's going on, because they say we normally dive straight into the problems, then with this really kind of meeting that we crack through some stuff, but it doesn't feel good. So we start off with one good thing that's going right, and then we get to the problems, and we find we're better at solving the problems when we've done that. So it's kind of interesting how you can play and get creative with these ideas. So there's lots of, I'm going to not do experiment 2, we'll do that later. But the clue here is an action for happiness is all about taking action. There are things that affect our happiness that we can't do anything about. But today is about thinking about what are the things that you can change. And psychologists from the psychology of motivation have found, and this is really important, that having a sense of control and a sense of freedom, as a friend over here talked about earlier, is actually fundamental for our psychological well-being. It's really important for our resilience as well. So what Action for Happiness has done is said, well, where are the areas that we can take action? What does the science say? It's not just Vanessa thought this was a nice idea, but what does the science say, the areas that we can take action, and what ideas does that spark? So we've drilled down on the science, thousands and thousands of research papers to develop what we call the 10 keys to happier living. So these are the areas that we can take action in our own lives. And there's lots, beneath these, there's a lot of interesting stuff around why these work, and also lots of ideas for action, really quite creative ideas of these things. And they tend to be, the first 5 are things that are more, in a way, kind of actions that are sort of external actions that we do that affect how we feel on the inside. And the second 5, this is rough, the second 5 are more internal states of being, reflection, and thinking about some of these things more deeply that then affect how happy we are on the outside. So I'm going to go through those in more detail this evening, the workshop this evening. But I just wanted to give you, we're just giving you a little bit of introduction about Action for Happiness. How many of you here had heard of Action for Happiness? A few, yeah. It's interesting. So we're a social movement. We were founded by Professor Lord Richard Layard back in 2011. We are lucky enough that we're a secular organisation. And part of the idea was that, in our busy, mostly secular lives today, how do we kind of create a happier, more caring world? What's the guidance for that? And luckily the science is helping. And our patron, and indeed our first member, is the Dalai Lama, because he really supported and liked what we're doing. So that's great. And what we do, we've got a massive online community, which you're welcome to just participate in, sign up for, become Facebook, Twitter, sign up as a member, you'll get lots of good stuff. So we've got a community of over 1 million people in 170 countries around the world. And we do a range of things. So we're about taking the evidence, the scientific evidence, and getting it out there in practical ways that people can take action for themselves in their community, in their workplaces, etc. We run quite a lot of events. One of our members is inspired to create these kind of happy cafes, which is creating places where people can go and talk about how they're feeling and ideas for action and connect with other people. And we've started running courses which are volunteer-led, and any of you could apply to become a member, to run one of these in your local area. And we haven't got one in Inverness. So think about whether you'd like to start one. I went to a lovely cafe. Was it Velocity Cafe? That would be a great place to run one. So these are courses where a volunteer can get people together and talk about what really matters, helping people explore what really matters and thinking about these things for themselves and their community. So we'd look at what makes us happy, how do we find peace of mind, how do we treat others, how can we create happier workplaces and communities, and indeed a happier world. So I really encourage you to think about all the materials provided, and it's free to set up. So, and we find that people, when they participate in this stuff, and what's great is it's getting people together from really diverse groups across social divides, across different ages, races, all sorts of stuff coming together and exploring this stuff together. And we're finding that of the participants that have been so far they're saying that we've measured their well-being before and after, and they've had a 20% increase in psychological well-being, and importantly, their levels of social trust have increased. So if we want to think of a happier, more caring world, this is one of the ways that we can do that. So we'd invite you in thinking about that as an action to do. Join us with one of our groups creating a happier, kinder, more caring world together. So that's it for me. Your happiness matters. I hope you're for that, and invite you to explore how you could take action.
Because